to it, ladies and gentlemen, to another major championship edition of Burke's Beat. Danny Burke, your host here as always. Remember, you could follow along on Twitter at DannyBurke5. You can follow the website, burksbeat.com, where I'm dishing out plenty of sports betting content, of course, covering the NBA postseason right now, Major League Baseball, and much more. But as I alluded to, this specific episode of our podcast is going to be centering around the PGA Championship. So, of course, we got to bring in our main golf betting expert, one of the best in the business. That is Brady Kannon, who you can follow on the tweets at Las Vegas Golfer. He writes for the PGA Tour for golf.com, and he is a host on Sports Grid, not only covering golf, but I know he does baseball. Excellent work with the NFL as well. So Brady's all over the place, and we're very, very excited to get him back here on the pod. So Brady, appreciate the time as always. Tell us a little bit about this course we got to look forward to in Louisville, Kentucky, Valhalla Golf Club. The last time it was there, 2014, Rory had won when it was there at that point. He just won this past week with the Wells Fargo Championship. The man, unfortunately, just filed for divorce. People are, saying that's going to incentivize him to play better, I guess. Brooks Koepka, who won this major last year, coming off a win in Live. Scotty Scheffler just had his baby. I mean, there's so many storylines circling this major championship. So give us a little rundown here from your perspective, my friend.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Danny. And you're right. There really are a number of storylines coming in. You mentioned Scotty Scheffler. He and his wife, they just had their first child. There's speculation on if he'll be experiencing any fatigue, any rust, how much has he been practicing? But the odds would tell you that everything's fine with Mr. Scheffler. And I imagine it is for the most part. There's a few different ways you could look at the birth of his first child. Yes, it could have an effect on fatigue and rust. It could also be a bounce, for a new father. It might inspire him somewhat. Oftentimes that type of thing does kick in. It's so immediate here. I don't know if that will be anything additional for Scheffler, but maybe down the road, maybe at the U.S. Open, what have you. That type of thing is not uncommon in all of sports, really. You mentioned Rory. Tough news to swallow today for him personally with the divorce, I understand. It's very interesting. You talk about the trend of the week, Danny. First of all, the trend was Rory McIlroy coming into Valhalla. In 2014, he came in off of 2 consecutive victories before winning that year. Well, this year he does the same, coming in off of 2 consecutive victories to the same golf course 10 years later. Well, it was 10 years ago that he broke up with his girlfriend, Wozniacki, the tennis star. He did that not long before winning at Valhalla, and now he's broken up with his wife. So the trends are abound coming into Valhalla for Mr. McIlroy. John Rahm, one of the pre-tournament favorites here. He's finished top 10 in all 7 live events this year. You mentioned Koepka, the defending champion, coming in off of a win. Yeah, a lot of the luminaries have some pretty good storylines coming in. As far as the golf course itself, it's a big boy track. The PGA has really become a bomber's paradise. We've seen them kind of go that direction in maybe the last decade or so. Last year at Oak Hill was a perfect example. Just a big beast of a golf course where it was all about hitting it long. And you saw a couple of the guys there at the top that do exactly that, Victor Hovland and Brooks Koepka. It's 7,600 yards is Valhalla, and that sounds like a monster. In 2014, it was about 150 yards shorter than that. They've added about 150 yards in length to Valhalla. But, over the course of time, the trajectory, the normal trajectory of technology and, athletes becoming better and physical health and what have you, I think the 10-year span, an average of 8 yards per hole longer, is probably about standard. So I don't think it's necessarily playing longer. I know it reads that way on paper, but I think it remains unchanged for the golfers in this field. It's got a little bit of a links-ish feel. There's some rolling contour and some mounding in the fairways. The fairways are very wide. They are tree-lined in most parts. There's zoysia grass fairways and bent grass greens, and we do see zoysia grass on occasion around the world at some different events of the past, and events they still play. In fact, it was just a couple weeks ago they had the same combination at TPC Craig Ranch for the Byron Nelson, zoysia grass fairways and bent grass greens. The greens are smaller than tour average, so scrambling probably comes into play because you are going to miss some greens in regulation. Because of the length of the golf course, most of the approach shots are going to come from about 175 to over 200 yards. The par fours, of course, are long, between 450 and 500 yards. The par threes are long. Everything is pretty long here. And it's very similar, I believe, to what we saw last week at Quail Hollow for the Wells Fargo Championship. And I'll also say it's similar to Torrey Pines, where they play the Farmers Insurance Open every year and have played a couple of U.S. Opens. And that is total driving is going to be very important. We saw at Quail Hollow last week, it's incredibly driver heavy. You can't necessarily choose to take 3-wood or a long iron off the tee. You really have to bang the driver at every turn. And that is the same here at Valhalla. And by total driving, I mean a combination of length and accuracy off the tee. That's important at Quail Hollow and Torrey Pines, and I think it will be here as well. I think you're going to see some scoring. I don't believe the course is going to be diabolically difficult. I do believe it will be soft. They've had a lot of rain in the area, in the Louisville, Kentucky area leading up, and expect a couple more days of rain as the tournament begins. It should kind of subside here as we get to the weekend, but I think that is going to make for soft fairways and soft greens, and the guys will be able to throw some darts into these greens. What that does at the same time is when you have a wet, soft golf course, it's going to make even a greater premium on length. So that is an advantage for the longer hitters. You've got 4-inch nasty rough bordering these wide fairways. And if that rough is wet and thick, that's going to make it even tougher to get out of, but at the same time, even tougher for the shorter hitters. So, the big guys that really bomb it and are able to gouge out of that rough more successfully than the shorter knockers, once again, it's an advantage for them. So, with the weather conditions, first of all, you have the PGA kind of trending towards being a bombers tournament. But now with the weather conditions as well, I think you're much more likely to get a big hitter coming out on top once again this season.
Now, Brady, you brought up, overall, just fantastic descriptions of everything with the course. But I did just want to bring up one aspect that I know you talk about plenty. And of course, when you and I are talking about golf, it's not as frequent. We usually just focus on the major championships. But for people out there who aren't as familiar, you mentioned the difference in the greens with the bent grass greens. Can you explain that a little bit more? So the difference with those type of greens versus other ones that we see featured on a weekly golf tournament, and what kind of difference it impacts toward the golfer's putting stroke?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'll start with the fairway too. Zoysia grass
Yeah.
fairways are not all that common in the Florida area and the southeastern United States. These guys typically play on Bermuda grass, which is a turf species that is very resistant to warm weather. It's very grainy. You'll get the grass blades growing in one direction, so if you're putting with the grain, your putts tend to be much quicker. Putting against the grain can be much slower. Poana is a popular green surface on the West Coast and at a lot of coastal properties where you have that ocean air that is present. It's a very spongy surface, tends to get bumpy. Bent grass is my particular favorite surface for greens. The fairways used to be bent here at Valhalla as well, but they switched to that zoysia, which is also a very heat resistant type of turf. It also is very drought tolerant. So, it may be able to dry out more quickly than other types of grasses. I mentioned, of course, the weather and the rain and stuff. These fairways might not be as soft as some other types of grasses because that zoysia grass is known to repel the water pretty well. But bent grass is my favorite type of surface to putt on as far as a turf species on the greens because it has very little grain. It's very, very smooth. It's like putting on a tabletop, and you don't have too many questions. What you see is what
Mhm.
you get, and it's oftentimes easier to read the breaks. Bent grass, typically you can make go at higher speeds. That's what they have at Augusta National for the Masters, and we don't see many putting surfaces faster than that throughout the entire year. So I think bent is a type of surface that brings more players into the fold, because I don't know if it's easier to putt on, but I think it's a more true surface. I mentioned Bermuda, where you have the grain, uh, Poana, where it can get bumpy. Bent, a good condition bent grass green is just perfect. So a guy that's rolling the rock well on bent should have a good week putting.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, appreciate you explaining that. I know there's a lot of terms, and for some of these novice bettors, especially when it comes to the links, very much appreciate that explanation. And I know that's going to go a lot into your analysis with some of the golfers that are going to make your betting slate. And before we get into that, Brady, I did want to just specifically talk a little bit more so about Scotty Scheffler. Now, you may have him in your betting ballot, maybe you don't, but when we had you on last for the Masters, you and I had a little conversation about how we were just intrigued at the idea of the yes and no price at Circus Sportsbook for him to win the tournament. And of course, he ended up getting the green jacket. And right now, at least at Circus Sportsbook, I see the yes price on Scheffler to win the PGA Championship at plus 455. Other outlets have it at about plus 450. The no for Scotty to win, meaning just, of course, he's not going to win it, you got to lay minus 605. What do you make about the no price, again, being relatively in that cheap realm because of how dominant Scotty has been?
Yeah, it's tough for me to wrap my head around a no price because I'm so involved in a yes price. And I don't know necessarily what is a correlated number, if you will.
Sure.
If a guy's plus 450 to win, does that mean he's minus 600 to no? And what does it mean if a guy's 14 to 1? What's his no? I don't really know that split. That's something I need to learn because that's part of sports betting for sure. Um, Minus 600 on the no. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like a bad bargain. Throw down $600 to win 100. Obviously, there's a pretty darn good chance that Scotty doesn't win. You've got 156 golfers in this field. And Danny, this has now clearly become the very best field in competitive professional golf. It used to be the Players Championship could argue that they had that, they owned that title, but not anymore because live players don't play the Players Championship any longer. So now you have the best field in golf. There are 16 live golfers in the field here at the PGA Championship. You do have 20 PGA club professionals, and it's not likely that they're going to win, but you don't have any amateurs. So, a field of 156, you take out the 20 club professionals, you're at 136. And, honestly, there might be 80, 90, I'd say there's at least 75 guys and probably more than that have a decent shot to win here. I mean, every major typically we see, I mean, if you just look at the leaderboard in 2014 from Valhalla, obviously Rory at the top. He just was able to hold off Phil Mickelson and Ricky Fowler. Ernie Els was up there. And then you had like Steve Stricker and Jim Furyk and Mikko Ilonen, who was a prominent European Tour player, Victor Dubuisson, who had a few good runs, in the early 2000s, and or I should say, mid 2000s, another European Tour player. So, there's always kind of some of those relative unknowns that might go off at 80 or 90 or 150 to 1 that seem to make their way into the leaderboard. So I don't think it's crazy to say that they're, beyond the top 50, 60 on the odds board. There's probably another 30 guys that might show up at some point. So, if we're dealing with 80 or 90 guys, yeah, to bet that Scotty's not going to do it, you probably have to like your chances, also considering the situation. And, I'm not going to say the birth of his first child is going to derail him. I said earlier, it might propel him. But, I think that is a real, I think you can make a genuine argument that it is a possible distraction. Whether that distraction can be positive or negative, we'll find out. But he's not coming in here like he normally would. Something
Mhm.
is certainly different, and it's a major life changing event that has occurred. So maybe that's a little bit in your favor, on the no. Um, betting to make any decent money on the no, you have to obviously outlay quite a bit of cash, and I'm not going to be involved with that. But I don't think it's a bad bet. I'd say this, Danny. I think it's probably a better bet than on the yes.
Sure. And look, I hear you, and it's so funny too because everybody and their grandmother who again just probably bets golf more casually are going to be running to the counter to bet the yes. And you understand why because of the pure dominance, but I also just agree with the angle you're coming at. And you're right. We've seen it in the past where people have the birth of their child and then they get propelled by it. But it just seems like for a guy like Scotty, it was a long anticipation. And clearly, this is the most important thing is in his life, and he's been very adamant about that, as other people have too. But I just feel like his sights are going to be set more so on, he's just more excited about that a little bit than the tournament. Obviously, we're purely speculating here, but the way you lay it out in terms of the depth of this field and the talent of it as well, I get what you're saying. And again, as we talked about in the last episode, it's certainly a bet for people who have the capital to spend because you have to lay so much. But I concur with you, my man. I mean, I would rather have a little piece of the no than I would at the yes. It's not to say I'm going to bet it, but if you had to make me choose, that's probably how I'd look to attack it. And honestly, because and I guess I'll ask you this then too, Brady. I mean, with the price being so short on Scotty Scheffler, at about plus 450, plus 455, wouldn't you almost rather wait a couple of days? And I know you do this with your live betting and you have updated articles with it as well. So everybody make sure you're following Brady because he'll have it halfway through on his Twitter at Las Vegas Golfer. But if maybe you got the odds slashed in half, somewhere around the plus 200, plus 250 range, whatever it may be, but you have 2 days to work with, wouldn't you almost rather wait? You lose a little bit of capital, but you have more conviction in that Scotty's in that competing position. Is that something you would almost rather attack with him?
Yes, I would, and I'll go further on that. But I want to go back to the baby too. I just kind of thought of this. Sam Burns just had his first child as well, and it was widely publicized that both he and Scotty at the Masters were going to pull out if that baby's birth or if the wife
Right.
went into labor or what have you. Well, Sam Burns, they had their child about 2 weeks ago, and I've seen some people kind of jump on him that this could propel him, this week. Couple things with Scotty. First of all, the birth of that child is so immediate. There's hardly time to even soak it in before you're teeing off at Valhalla. Second thing, Sam Burns started off the year in really good form and then kind of fell off a little bit. And and now this happens to him. So it could be a springboard. For Scotty, he's been as hot as anybody in the world of golf since Tiger Woods. So this is an interruption to
Right.
that. We talk about that with like a bye week in football. If you have an NFL team that's won 5 games in a row and then all of a sudden you have an interruption like a bye week, that's usually a bad thing. I'm not going to say it's going to happen for Scotty, but it is an interruption to what is an incredible role. Whereas for Sam Burns, it was a obviously positive experience. It is for Scotty too, but it comes at a time when he was in a little bit of a struggle and he's had more time to deal with it leading up to this tournament. There's that as far as Scheffler. And I apologize. Now I've lost my train of thought. What was the original question?
No, you're good. That was a great point to bring up. And then the other side of it was just waiting maybe a couple days
Oh
to
yeah.
live bet Scheffler at a little bit decreased price.
Yeah, or even increased. Let's say he
Sure.
starts
Yeah.
off the first day 1 under par and the leader's at 8 under or something like that. Yeah, no, I've actually made a lot of money on betting Scotty in game. I bet him in game at Bay Hill. I bet him in game at the Masters, and I bet him in game at the RBC Heritage. No, he's been a beautiful thing on this run. It's like betting on Floyd Mayweather. He doesn't lose. No, I've been on him pre-tournament one time this year, and that was in Phoenix for the Waste Management. And he was right there up until the bitter end, even got to minus 200 in the live wagering, but was eventually overtaken by Nick Taylor. But like I say, I've bet him 3 times successfully in game, and I might be on that train once again here at Valhalla. uh, yeah, you're right. He might even be minus 110. Maybe he's got the lead going into the final round and he's at minus 110 and he's not, minus 310 because it's a major. And
Mhm.
those that might be trailing him are likely world class players. So you might get a good price on Scotty if he's in that position again. Yeah, it's a good point you bring up. We talk about probably rather having the no bet than the yes, and do I want to bet plus 450 on the yes? No, but I might want to bet, like you say, 2 to 1 when we're halfway through the tournament or something like that.
All right, Brady. Well, let's go ahead and dive into it with your official pre-tournament plays, whether it be outright winners, whether it be head-to-heads, any other type of props you may have, top 20s, top 10s. Rifle them off here, my friend. I know you said you got to be able to drive the ball long, be accurate with it, and then, of course, with those unique putting greens. So who fits the bill for you this weekend?
Yeah, that's what we saw on the leaderboard in 2014. We saw generally, almost everybody up and down the top 10 or top 15 what was a long hitter of the golf ball and ranked, like in the top 25 for the week in driving distance. And also at the same time, a number of those guys ranked in like the top 15 or so for putting that week. So yeah, drive it long and then hole some putts looks to be a pretty good formula to start with at Valhalla. And my first selection is one of those guys, and that's Xander Schauffele. I got him at 14 to 1, and it takes a little bit of a leap of faith here from what we've seen out of Xander, not really throughout his career, but most recently. He had the 54 hole lead at the Players Championship, and he had the 54 hole lead last week at the Wells Fargo, and he gave both of them up. And oddly enough, it was to the two favorites this week. Scotty caught him at the Players, and Rory caught him last week at Quail Hollow. There's a little bit of everything in my reasoning behind this play. Obviously, Xander, checks all the boxes. He's probably he's ranked number 3 in the world in the official world golf rankings, and that's probably truly where he is. He's certainly not outside of the top 5 players in the world. That's how good he is. He does everything well. He's 6th on the PGA Tour for total driving. He's 17th in this field for strokes gained putting on bent grass over the last 24 rounds. He's a top 10 machine in major championships. He's played well at all the correlated courses, all of that. It's not hard to imagine that a guy that's a top 5 player in the world has all those boxes checked. But I also like the fact that I think the general public is probably down on Xander Schauffele after what they've seen, especially last week and earlier this season. And he's kind of gotten this, well, call it fair or unfair label of not being able to close the door. He has closed the door throughout his career on a few occasions, but more often than not, he's not been able to close the door. That's his second straight runner-up finish, by the way, at Quail Hollow, which is a course that's very similar to Valhalla. So, if you're going to give me 14 to 1 and tell me Xander's going to be in second place on Sunday, I'll take that right now. But the other thing I'm getting to here is while the rest of the world is kind of down on Xander Schauffele, it might be a good time to stick with him. So I'm going to go with Xander for all of the above reasons. And then I went with Brooks Koepka at 14 to 1. And Koepka, after he won 2 weeks ago, which by the way was his last start, and I'll throw this in there, 16 out of the last 18 PGA championship winners have finished top 25 in their most recent start leading up to the championship. Maybe more so than any other major, it has shown that you really want to be hot coming in and in good form coming in. I don't think it does you great, it does you a great service to be in lousy form coming into any major, but we've really seen it as a strong trend here at the PGA. So Brooks comes in off of a win at Sentosa Golf Club in Singapore on the Live Circuit, which, by the way, is a course that features Zoysia grass fairways. Koepka also in his career has had a win, a couple of runner-ups, and a third-place finish at TPC Southwind in Memphis, where they play the FedEx St. Jude Championship. That course also has Zoysia grass fairways. And I didn't want to be a prisoner of the moment when he won a couple weeks ago in Singapore and go, okay, here we go. We got a major on deck. Brooks just won. Let's run to the window. He's going to do it again. I didn't want to be that guy. Whereas I said I didn't want to join the masses and their sentiment for Xander Schauffele, I am going to join the masses here on Brooks Koepka, because you look at what this guy has done, and it's extremely difficult to leave him off your card. He's won two U.S. Opens and also had a fourth place finish at a U.S. Open. He's had 4 top 10 finishes at a British Open. He's twice finished runner-up at the Masters. In addition to 3 PGA championship titles, he's had 3 other top 5 finishes at the PGA. His record in majors is just unbelievable. Almost half the wins in his career have come at major championships. So I had to drink the Kool-Aid there and go with Brooks as well. Another guy who is long off the tee and also putts very well. And then next up, I went with Bryson DeChambeau, more of a mid-range price here at 31-1. I think you can still find him in the neighborhood of 28 or 29.
Yep.
He's a guy that hasn't made my cards in a lot of major championships, but as his career has developed a little bit here, and we've started to see this guy, put up more and more good finishes in majors, he needs to be reckoned with, and he's not just a young flash in the pan anymore. He's making a consistency about how he's done in major championships. He's finished 4th twice in the PGA Championship. He's got a top 10 at the British. He just comes off of his best ever finish, a 6th place finish at the Masters, and he's also won a U.S. Open. He's number 1 in the LIV Tour in driving distance. He's number 2 in this field. He's number 1 on the par 4s that measure 450 to 500 yards. He's 24th in this field in bogey avoidance, and he's 34th in strokes gained putting on bent grass. So again, the guy checks a lot of boxes. He's also in the LIV events this season. I mentioned there's been 7 events this season. He does not check the box for having a top 25 finish in his last start. He's been a little bit off the boil here in his last 2 starts, finished just outside of the top 25, if I recall. But prior to that, in the 5 LIV events prior, he was top 10 in 4 of them. So, I'm confident that the form is still pretty darn good, even though it hasn't shown up in his last 2 LIV events. And if you look at what he did in the Masters, he finished 6th there. That's another thing. You go back to 2012 for the PGA Championship, and every one of those PGA champions had made the cut in the Masters leading up to the PGA. The only one that doesn't really qualify is 2020 because of COVID. If you recall, the Masters was played in November that year. It wasn't leading up to the PGA. It was after the PGA. The average finish of those PGA championship champions having made the cut at the Masters was 18th. Now, in 2019, the PGA moved to May, so it is the most immediate major on the calendar following the Masters. That average finishing position of those PGA champions since 2019 has now moved to 8th. And so Bryson, again, with a 6th place finish at the Masters, definitely checks that box. By the way, your top 8 finishers at the Masters this year, the guys that would qualify: Scottie Scheffler, Ludwig Oberg, Max Homa, Colin Morikawa, Tommy Fleetwood, Bryson DeChambeau, Cameron Smith, and Xander Schauffele, another one of my selections. So that's a wrap on Bryson. And next up, another guy that finished top 8 at Augusta. He was 3rd, in fact. That's Colin Morikawa at 32-1. That was a pretty good price I got. I was shocked to see it, and it came down almost immediately. When he got off to a good start at Quail Hollow, that's when I jumped on it. And I think it was the very next day after he put up another good round, it came down. But I've actually seen 135 out there. But I think in general, he's probably closer to about 26. Morikawa is definitely not known as a bomber. But at Quail Hollow, for that tournament, he averaged literally just a tick under 300 yards off the tee. So that is not chopped liver as far as distance off the tee. but he also ranks in the top 50s, 49th for total driving on the PGA Tour. And that is in large part due to how accurate he is. He is number 2 on the PGA Tour in driving accuracy. So he's going to get it out there far enough, I believe. And he probably won't have to deal with that 4-inch thick, wet rough because he's going to find a lot of fairways being as accurate as he is. He's also just a major big game hunter. He's won the PGA Championship at Harding Park in 2020. He has 2 top 5 finishes at US Opens. He's won the British Open, and he's finished top 10 at the Masters 3 times. He is also tied with Patrick Cantlay, number 1 in this field for the most wins on Jack Nicklaus designed golf courses, which I think I failed to mention. Valhalla is designed by Jack Nicklaus. He's also won at Narashino Country Club last year in October in 2023. He won the Zozo overseas, again, another course that features Zoysia grass fairways. So again, and here's another thing to, I guess, check the final box. His putting has all of a sudden been outstanding in the last couple of months. He's gained strokes putting in the last 3 stroke play events he's played. And I think it was over 3 shots that he gained on the field at Augusta. Those greens are extremely difficult to putt. And he gained over 3 strokes on the field there. So the putting is all of a sudden turned for Morikawa, which was a skill set that he did not hang his hat on for most of his career. But I just couldn't ignore, you kind of throw out the distance because he has the accuracy, but he's still not extremely short off the tee either. And then the way he performs in major championships and the improved putting, I had to jump on Morikawa. And then I went to Joaquin Niemann, my 3rd live player on the card. And I think there's something interesting to this, Danny. We've talked a lot about Scotty Scheffler, and deservedly so. The guys on the PGA Tour have kind of become accustomed to Scotty beating the heck out of them every week. If you're on the live circuit, maybe you're a little bit more removed from that. I believe the A games of Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, and Joaquin Niemann, my 3 live players on my card this week, I think the A games of all 3 of those guys can go toe-to-toe with Scotty. And not being around him every week and witnessing his dominance firsthand and getting beaten by him and becoming frustrated by that week in and week out could be a benefit for the live players this week. You go to the correlated courses, another Jack Nicklaus design, the Memorial Tournament at Muirfield Village. Niemann has a 3rd place and a 6th place finish there. He tends to putt better on bent grass greens. We've seen that throughout his career, and he is ranked 7th on the live circuit for putting average. He is also 2nd on live in both driving distance and greens and regulation. This guy can really bang it, both with the long irons and off the tee. If you look at what he's done on the live tour this year, he comes off of a 7th place finish in Singapore in his last event. And in 7 events on the live circuit this year, he has 4 top 10s and 2 victories. So this guy's as hot as anybody right now. He's got the distance. He's got the putting. And he made the cut at the Masters. He finished 22nd, almost just barely by 1 shot, missed cashing a top 20 finish on for us when I was on him for the Masters as well. He may be even better suited for this golf course. We will see. So I like the way Niemann comes in and the skill sets that he brings to the table. And then Niemann, by the way, at 40-1. And then a couple of other longer bombs, Danny. Will Zalatoris, I got him at 57-1, and I thought, boy, what a great price that is. And then I woke up on Monday morning and I saw him as high as like 90-1 and 80-1, and he's still in the neighborhood of 80+1. And I was like, gosh, what happened is I thought maybe he got injured again or something, but I think it was more related to the fact that he kind of fell apart over the weekend at the Wells Fargo. He started off beautifully. He was in contention at a couple under par. And then over the weekend, he fell off the pace, and on Sunday actually shot 80. So it's hard to believe that his price would drift that far for a guy that, again, young in his career, has been a major killer. If you look at what he's done, at the PGA championships of the past, he's got an 8th place finish. He lost in a playoff a couple years ago to Justin Thomas. Um, at the Masters, he has 3 top 10s, recorded another one just last month, or yeah, I guess last month, finishing ninth at Augusta National. You look at what he's done at some of the big boy courses in his career. 13th at Torrey Pines. He's also finished 7th at Torrey Pines, 10th and 4th at Bay Hill. He ranks 28th on tour in total driving. He's finished runner-up at the U.S. Open. Uh, this is another guy, I think, like Morikawa, maybe earlier in the stage of his career, that is a major big game hunter. He's kind of similar to Morikawa off the tee as well. Not quite as accurate, but still extremely accurate, and hits it in that neighborhood of the 295-ish. Not by definition a total bomber, but still gets it out there a ways. So despite that drift in the odds on Zalatoris and that shooting 80 on Sunday, I still expect this guy to show up this week, because that's all he seems to do is show up in big boy golf tournaments. And then finally, my longest bomb, triple digits on Sepp Straka. I got him at 125 to 1. I've seen him anywhere from 80 to 1 to 100 to 1. I think the 125s are gone, but I would say if you can still find him at triple digits, it's a good buy. If you look at what he's done, and this is a guy who is another extremely accurate hitter, not a bomber, but he is third on the PGA Tour in driving accuracy. And last year, I mentioned this before, we were at a beast of a golf course at Oak Hill where Koepka and Victor Hovland were there in the final pairing, a couple of long bombers. Well, Sepp Straka finished 7th. So apparently he could hold his own with that accuracy off the tee and not all the length in the world. He is 51st on the PGA Tour in total driving. And if you look at what he's done, in addition to that 7th place at last year's PGA Championship, he was 16th this year at the Masters. And, he does qualify for that top 25 in his last start leading up to the PGA, as he was 8th last week at another big boy golf course at Quail Hollow. And oh, by the way, he was runner-up last summer at the British Open. So this guy, again, relatively young in his career, kind of like Zalatoris and some of the other guys we've mentioned here, he is just seemingly getting progressively better and better in the major championships and big boy golf tournaments. Let's also mention Will Zalatoris. I go back to him for a moment. He won. His only PGA Tour win was in 2022 at the FedEx St. Jude Championship at TPC Southwind. I mentioned Koepka's success there. Zoysia grass fairways on those golf courses. Well, when Zalatoris won it in 2022, he beat Sepp Straka in a playoff. So the Zoysia grass comes into play again. I also like the fact that Straka was just a member recently this last fall of the winning Ryder Cup team, Team Europe. And, you talk about these signature events and Bay Hill and Torrey Pines and Wells Fargo and major championships. I think the Ryder Cup is another thing that's good to have on your resume before you win your first major. Sepp Straka has shown in recent years, time and time again, he can handle the biggest stages.
All right. I love it, Brady. And I really like, and these are some guys that I was looking at too, especially the names of Bryson DeChambeau. Like you said, around 28 to 1, I still see him available. He's someone who's definitely making my card. Neiman as well. I know he's 35 to 1 at most outlets. I believe Circa, like you mentioned, still has him at that 40 to 1 range. I did want to ask you, because I know you briefly mentioned him before we got to your best bets. Tell me about Jon Rahm a little bit. I see him at plus 1850 at Circa. Other books have him at about 18 to 1. So is he not going to be making your card for this tournament?
He won't be, but he almost did. And I even saw today, just not too long ago, I saw a 20 to 1 pop on Jon Rahm. Probably just not
Okay.
getting a lot of love out there. One of the most well-respected handicappers that I like to read his stuff every week. I know he likes Rahm this week at around 18. And I mean, how can you argue with a guy that's, again, like Schauffele, a top 5 golfer in the world? He's finished top 10 at every live event this year. And, if those live events were 72 holes, maybe Jon Rahm would have turned some of those top 10s into a victory. So you have to
Sure.
consider that as well. I know he was very upset with his Masters performance. That was a tough situation for him being the defending champion. Rarely do I ever bet on the defending champion. Now I have in this case in Brooks Koepka. But I think the Masters is different, where
Mhm.
John Rahm had made the switch to the live circuit and everything that comes with being the Masters defending champion. I think the spotlight is so bright that that might have gotten to him a little bit. Um, I'd be surprised. I think he finished 48th or something like that at the Masters. I'd be surprised if he was that bad here this week. But you know how it is, Danny. You can't pick every guy. And I took a couple of stabs at some shorter shots, Kepka and
Mhm.
Schauffele, at 14. And then I kind of went to the 30s and the 50s and into the triple digits. And, Rom was just one of the guys that was an odd man out for me. I'm just not convinced still that he's in a perfect frame of mind and in perfect
Mhm.
form, even though he's had the 10 top or the top tens, the seven top tens in every live event this season. He's been, vocal about the fact that he's not sure if he's completely adjusted to this format, wearing shorts and listening to rock and roll and, playing 54 holes and stuff like that. And I don't know if he's completely back to the John Rahm that we know from the past that is ready to start bringing down major championships again. And that's just a theory. I could easily be proven wrong this week. He's been extremely good at Jack Nicklaus courses. He's won at the Memorial. He's contended in other Jack Nicklaus venues. So um, there's a lot of cases I think you can make for him, but I was able to kind of think of one that I can make against him, and that just left me off of him.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I remember you and I were talking about that, not only because it's difficult replicating that in itself, going back to back at Augusta, but because everything that was potentially flooding his mentality with his decision to transition over to live, as you were alluding to. So I completely understand maybe some of that lingering into another major championship. Brady, before I get you out of here, my man, and again, very much appreciate your time and analysis. I just wanted to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it that when you make your outright bets, you simultaneously are also placing a top 20 wager on these guys, or is it only some of them, or do I have that completely wrong? I just wanted to make sure.
No, you're right about that. And that's just a strategy that I have adopted because I figure if I've got a guy that I think has a great chance to win the tournament, why not also bet him for a top 20? It's almost like a little
Mhm.
bit of a hedge bet. And where I will bet very little in the outright market, I will increase that risk in the top 20 market. Obviously, you're not getting as good of odds, but that's kind of my theory on that. And in this case, I did bet all of these guys for a top 20: DeChambeau, Morikawa, Zalatoris, Straka, and Neiman. But the price wasn't as good on top 20s for Kepka and Schauffele. So I
Right.
went top 10 with them. The price on Brooks Kepka, I've seen basically a consensus price of plus 150 for a top 10. At Circa, he's plus 225.
Wow.
That's really quite a number. And Xander's also about plus 150 to finish top 10. So I went top 10 on those guys. It seems like the best bet you can make on the board these days with what has happened recently is Xander to finish top 10. So we'll see if we can cash that one and maybe one better with him winning it.
Yeah, and I'm just looking right now here in Illinois. I mean, for top 20 for a guy like Bryson DeChambeau, the best number it looks like in Illinois is plus 138. And then for
Yeah, that's
Neiman
good.
plus 175. Yeah, I
That's
like that
really
a
good.
lot.
Yeah, I
Yeah, because
think I
other
got
books have it at
Neiman at
like even
about
money.
yeah, I think I got Neiman at maybe plus 175. DeChambeau, I want to say, was a plus 120. Morikawa was plus 125. Zalatoris, I got at 3-1. Straka was plus 275. Pretty competitive prices. But that's close to 140 is very good on DeChambeau.
Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, I'll be following you along as I usually do with your plays because you're always crushing on the links, but especially with those top 20 coinciding with the outright winners. I mean, you put it so perfectly. Look, it's a little bit of a hedge. And if you have enough conviction on these guys to outlast the rest of the field, why not also give yourself another shot to get some profit with the top 20 market there where they have the realistic chance, even more so, of cashing in for you and still at a plus price for some of these guys, like we mentioned with Bryson DeChambeau and Joaquin Neiman. So a lot to look forward to this week at
Yeah, you
Valhalla
know,
Golf Club.
Danny,
Yeah,
there's a
go
lot
ahead.
of there's a lot. I guarantee you, and because not a lot of people that I know in the golf betting space do it as exactly like I have. Now they might have some of the same players for top
Hmm.
20s or top 10s or something like that, but they don't necessarily just blanket their outright card the way I do. They'll pick and choose other guys that look to be real good value bets, and they might even go deeper to a top 30 or a top 40. But my thinking is, if I've got the confidence in a guy to win the tournament, and maybe I'm a little less confident about a guy with his chances to win, then do I really want to invest in him in a top 20? So
Right.
I just try and keep it simple. Handicap guys that I think can win. And then, like you say, kind of quote unquote hedge a little bit. And let's
Mhm.
also take him for a top 20.
Yeah, no, makes complete sense. Brady, you're the man. I appreciate you taking the time as always. You do excellent work over at Sports Grid, where you can find them, folks, hosting. You had me on this past weekend, so always fun catching up with you there, Brady. And I know you do great work not only at Sports Grid, but also at golf.com, where you will have your article coming out. You and I are recording this Tuesday afternoon, so it'll be coming out tonight or tomorrow, right? Where people can kind of get the written expression of your plays.
Well, I'm just pulling it up now. It might be up as we speak. Let me see if it is. I don't see it just yet. I would imagine in the next half hour or so, it'll be up there at
Awesome.
golf.com. Should be on their first page there of some of the latest stuff that they have released. It says they always put it like, so many number of picks our golf expert loves this week. So look for that, and you can get the detailed analysis on what we went over in general here.
Great, great. Awesome, Brady. And then, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, and Brady mentioned the last time we had him on, if he likes any in game angles, meaning the middle of this tournament heading toward the weekend, he'll also be tweeting out the action on that at Las Vegas Golfer. Again, he'll be explaining it on Sports Grid at golf.com. Writing for the PGA Tour, Brady has got you covered. Brady, best of luck with all your bets this weekend. We'll be cheering you on because you know I'm going to be riding the same ones, my friend. So, again, thank you for the time and looking forward to the next time we could talk some shop.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Danny.
You got it. All right. There he is, folks. Brady Kannon at Las Vegas Golfer on the tweets. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Burke's Beat. Make sure you follow along myself on Twitter at DannyBurke5 and the website, burksbeat.com. And if you subscribe here on Spotify and Apple to the podcast, helps you get notified as soon as possible when the new episodes are released. Best of luck with all your wagers, folks, and take care.